I was honored today with having a few stones, dirt, rotten eggs, and a dead cat thrown at me. Bend your ears this way today as I go over only a small portion of the accolades and accomplishments of a man I am quite certain most anyone has never heard of. This man is an unsung hero of the Christian faith. Today, that song will be sung boldly and spoken with emotion, just like this man did in his day. Surprisingly, to you maybe anyway, I'm a preacher. I have a few men on my Mount Rushmore of preachers, you might say. This man that I speak of today is among them, right after the Lord Jesus Christ. Today I will tell you but a small part of the most well-known man in the colonies in the 18th century. That man was George Whitefield. Today, I will be talking about George Whitefield's life in the colonies. We will then talk about his travels, and I will conclude with an eyewitness account of what it was like when George Whitefield came to town. George Whitefield came to the colonies across the Atlantic, the first of many, and as you will see later just how many, trips in 1738. He became a sensation in a very short time. He preached to groups of what some estimate as many as 30,000 people. With no microphone, in a day with no social media. In these times, contrary to what you might think, church attendance was on a paltry 17% of the population at that time. That's opposed to 60% today. He preached an average of 1,000 times a year for 30 years. That's nearly 3 times a day, every day, for 3 decades. It's estimated that 80% of colonists had seen George Whitefield preach in person. He was more recognizable in his day than George Washington. George Whitefield traveled 13 times back and forth over the Atlantic in his lifetime to preach in England and then back to America. He did this not on a yacht or a cruise ship either. In his times, he is credited with the longest trip made on American soil on horseback from New York City to Savannah, Georgia. On this ride, he would proclaim his message all along the way. In some legs of his journey, groups of men of near 1,000 would follow closely behind him just to hear more. There's an account of a farmer. I wish I had time to read the whole account, but I'm just going to briefly highlight it today. His name was Nathan Cole. This will help you to better understand the excitement and fervor that people had to hear this humble man preach. Nathan's quoted as saying this: "Then on a sudden, in the morning, about 8 or 9 of the clock, there came a messenger." You see, this messenger was bringing news that George Whitefield was preaching 12 miles away. Here's that farmer's reaction, and I quote, "I was in my field at work. I dropped my tool I had in my hand, and I ran home to my wife, telling her to make ready quickly to go to hear Mr. Whitefield preach. After running to his pasture with all his might, fearing he would be late, they left as fast as their horse could carry them, with 12 miles to make in just an hour. They made their way to within a half a mile of the road that led to where Whitefield was to preach." Nathan says this: "I saw before me a cloud of fog rising. I thought it came from the great river, but it came from the road. I heard a noise something like thunder. The road was so filled with frantic men and women, Nathan said he could barely find a horse length to fit between them. This was a traffic jam on horseback, just to see a man preach. When Nathan and his wife got there, some 3,000 had gathered to hear Whitefield preach in his small town. This man was like a magnet for the lost. Nathan said when he first heard the preacher, it gave him a heart wound. His old foundation was broken up, he says, and he saw his own righteousness could not save him. George Whitefield united the colonies through religion and was the first to break the mold of the soft, solemn preachers of his day. Today, we only could scratch the surface. You see, I risked my grade to tell you as much about Whitefield as I could. We talked about his beginnings in the colonies and his travels. Then we discussed an eyewitness account about what it was like to see Whitefield. I opened with a quote, and now I'll end with one. Take care of your life, and the Lord will take care of your death.